Good evening, and welcome to another episode of The Fire Caves, a Star Trek Deep Space Nine podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Perry.
And I'm your host, David. Tonight we're talking about Season 6, Episode 9, Statistical Probabilities. Before we continue, you can find us on Facebook, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube as The Fire Caves, a Star Trek Deep Space Nine podcast.
That is correct. And as I say every single week, you should find us and follow us because we are awesome. We're a pretty good time. And I think that you're going to really enjoy our show, especially the episode that we're doing tonight, because it's actually going to feature two Trek episodes. So I'm really excited to talk about that, of course. I do want to just take a brief moment to apologize for last night. I know that's typically the night that we do our live show, but we had a little bit of some confusion in regards to what we needed to really do and cover and so forth.
I
So we
didn't
just
watch the
needed to.
second episode we were doing tonight. That's my fault.
I was trying to be gracious here,
I'll be
but
honest, it was my
instead of
fault.
instead of saying it's all David's fault, I was just trying to, you know. But yes, it was all David's fault. But now that we are all on the same page here, we're able to obviously continue. So hopefully, it didn't throw off anything for you. And again, you can always catch our show. Go to YouTube and watch the episode that we did. You can also listen to us anywhere you happen to listen to podcasts. As I've said before, I do it on Spotify. Yes, I do listen to my own show on Spotify. So, it's okay. You can too. I promise it's okay. Now, before we get into all of the stuff that we need to talk about tonight, we like to do, of course, our little check in. So, David, how has your past week been?
Week's been good. Again, Labor Day sales coming up for us at work, which is one of the big sales of the year. It's always kind of tough because you got people coming in, but they're like looking at spending lots of money, but that means they don't want to just drop it all in one go, and so they're more willing to look around and not necessarily spend it right away. But I'm one of those people who I'm like, I don't want to hold a gun to people's heads. I don't want to be too aggressive. I want to be chill, but I don't know. Sometimes I'm like, maybe I'm too chill. Who knows? But other than that, week's been fine. Did finish watching the show Shogun this week. Good show. Really enjoyed it. Apparently, they're already working on another couple seasons, which is interesting because I did feel like first season, did a pretty good job of wrapping up the story. I mean, it's not like it was 100% wrapped up, but if it was like that's it, we're done, it would have been a good season. Would have had bought the book. Do plan on reading it. So if you have time to watch something, Shogun is on Hulu from FX. And yeah, been reading book 6 of Red Rising, and it's great. My roommate's a jerk. He told me that be prepared for an emotional roller coaster. He said as I was getting it, and I was like, man, like I already know these are pretty intense with the plot and the ups and downs and this and the those and to tell me to be ready for an emotional roller coaster. You can't just let me enjoy it and then we talk about it afterward. You have to make some sort of comment. Like, what are you doing here? Come on. So gave him a hard time for that, but I'm halfway through that. I also went ahead and picked up a copy of The Mercy of Gods, which is the next book by James S.A. Corey, the pen name for the guys who did The Expanse.
Mm,
So I just have a copy of it because I wanted to give them their first couple weeks sold however many copies. So went ahead and bought one just to give them that perk, even though I won't read it for a little bit until at least I finish the Expanse books. Um, and yeah, not much else to talk about, I guess. Really, it's the usual. What's up with you?
I'm pretty much the same. Just been working a lot. Just want to say, by the way, I'm so glad that I don't do sales anymore. I was never really the salesman interested in sales, all that kind of stuff. But I did it for what was that, 5 years, whatever, and it was never good for me. I'm more of a cut and dry, this or that, yes or no kind of person. There are
Yeah.
rules, protocols, things like that. I like that, not having to try to be like persuasive and whatever to anyway. Glad I don't do that anymore, but my job has been pretty good, pretty fulfilling so far. I know I told you guys a while back I had been moved into a different department, which I've been really enjoying, and so far just kind of gonna keep that going as much as possible. Everything is easier, it's less stress. There's just way more of the stuff that I'm interested in that I like to do is a part of my job now. So yeah, I don't feel stressed out when I go to work anymore. I think that's kind of the main thing everybody wants is to not feel like even on a Monday you're rolling in and be like, oh God, I don't even have that feeling anymore, so I'm really enjoying it. I have been reading the seventh book in the Expanse series as we have been continuing down to try to finish that series.
Mm.
Now, again, there are nine books in the actual story series. They have another book that's like a compilation of short stories that kind of explain certain things in the universe.
Yeah.
So, yeah, so 10 books total. I have not started reading that yet. I'm actually, I don't know if this is a good thing or not, but I've really just been focusing on reading the main books, and then I'm going to go back and read those. Uh,
Sure.
I'm in book seven. I
Yeah,
wanted to get
man.
for you and show you here. I'm in book seven. I'm just starting chapter 14 of book seven, so I feel like I'm coming along pretty good
Yeah.
with this one. And I've really been enjoying this book. Like, I don't think I had talked about it before. Um, I believe book 5 was the one that I had enjoyed the most, which was the first book that where our main cast was separated and we're having to do a lot of things on their own.
Right.
And we kind of got these moments where they were always like, what would Holden do? What would Amos do? Whatever, and trying to figure these things out. I really like that. I'm liking this book now for really the jump in time, and some of our favorites, showing up in their older and having to deal with the fact that they're older while also trying to explain kind of the new world that we're in because, it's a 30-year jump. So, yeah, a lot of things have changed. And just be aware of that when you're starting this one. But I don't think that it's bad. I really like what they've done so far to kind of explain why we're looking at things the way that we are. So, needless to say, I'm really enjoying this book. So I'm gonna wait. I'm not really sure how many chapters it has total, but I know I'm not at the halfway point yet. So when I get there, when I get to halfway, I will let you know, David.
Right.
Because you, Mr. Speed Reader, will finish the book in a day, and I'll be like, well, you got to wait like 3 weeks because other than
Gotcha.
that, things have been going quite well.
Good.
Still going strong with all the workouts and things. I need to retool some of that because I'm not 20, and it's kind of my constant battle is the trying to figure out how to adjust to get something out of the workout and not just be sore all the time.
Right.
So work in progress, but I'm enjoying the work, needless to say. All
Good.
right. So, with that being said, because we're, not here to talk necessarily about workouts and things like that. I mean, unless you want to, and I can go into it, maybe if you do want to know, you can always send me a message and I'm more than happy to go over things with people. I do it a lot at the gym anyway. So, I mean, yeah, but anyway, again, not here to talk about all those things. We're here to talk about Star Trek, Deep Space Nine, and a special shout out and divergence into Strange New Worlds. So, without further ado, David, do you want to give the recap, or do you want me to do it now?
Well, how about this? I'll do the recap of like one episode, and you do the recap of like the Strange New Worlds one, and
Okay,
we
that
go
works.
back and forth. Yeah.
But let's try to, since we are going to do this, and it is covering two
Keep it
episodes.
simple.
Yeah, very simple because we're going to get
Okay.
into a lot of stuff. So you just really need kind of the premise setup of both episodes, and then we can go from
Right.
there.
Okay. All right. So the episode on Deep Space Nine, the episode we're primarily talking about is statistical probabilities. It is a Dr. Bashir focused episode. We will remember that at this point we have learned that Bashir was a genetically engineered child. When he was a child, his parents took him away secretly to get genetically modified so that he could become a particularly intelligent child, whereas before he was kind of behind. And they gave him some physical upgrades as well, if you will. But the problem, though, is that the history of Star Trek is such that there was a war in the past. What was that called? Perry, the eugenics wars,
The
right?
eugenics wars.
Yeah,
Yes.
eugenics wars, and anyone who remembers Khan, he was also part of a genetically enhanced group that killed a lot of people. And basically, the problem with genetically engineered people is they have a tendency to being both mentally and physically superior, and knowing it, they have at times caused wars and they've hurt people. And so it's basically been outlawed in the Federation to go through any sort of genetically engineered modifications, and you can be punished for having done so. So Dr. Bashir is one of these people. We now know this, and he volunteers to work with four of these genetically modified people who come to the station so that he can just work with people like himself. Uh, these four, when he starts working with them, they start noticing some of the details about the relationship that the Federation has with Cardassia and Cardassia with the Dominion. They see, for example, a televised message from Damar, who used to be Gul Dukat's second in command. He's
Mhm.
apparently now the leader of Cardassia. And while he talks in this speech about wanting peace talks with the Federation, they piece together details from just watching his body language about him feeling guilty about this or that, or uh, basically they figure out details about him just by looking at him. And so Dr. Bashir, working with them and studying the details of the peace talks that Cisco has with the Dominion, with Damar and Wayun, they realize that Wayun really wants a certain planet uh, in the new proposed border that
Mhm.
would allow them to make Tetracell white, the stuff that allows the Jem'Hadar soldiers to continue working. If they don't get it, they die, go crazy, can kill a lot of people. So if they
As we've
can,
seen many times,
yeah,
the Ketracel white addiction very strong in the Dominion soldiers. So yeah, we know.
exactly. If they could secure that planet, that would obviously be in their favor. So Bashir goes to Cisco and reveals what he and the other four have realized with their special abilities. But he continues talking and reveals that the five of them together have actually determined a number of things about future events. They've kind of, set up algorithms that allow them to determine what they think will happen. So, for example, they think they should actually allow the Dominion to take the planet with this ability to make the white, because if they don't, then the Dominion will be forced to attack in order to get the Tetracell white, and that will cause casualties and then cascading problems. So they propose, well, let them have it. And Cisco, he's the one in charge of talks, so he just basically stalls for time. But as the five of them continue working together, Bashir and the others become convinced that actually Starfleet is destined to lose to the Dominion, and that it'll actually be 5 generations down the line before a rebellion centered on Earth is finally able to restore, to throw off the Dominion's shackles. So they basically, Bashir in particular, lose hope in any sort of resistance that the Federation could have against the Dominion. And so while Bashir tries to convince Cisco of this, the other four decide that they are going to go straight to the Dominion and admit and give information about the Starfleet's strategic positioning, so that excuse me, the Dominion sorry, so that the
Mm.
Dominion can basically win the war before it ever gets started. Excuse me, something is in my throat.
Why
Perry, do
don't
you
you
want to
take a
finish
second?
up?
Yeah, yeah. So basically, what's going on here is they're trying to use their massive, super genius, genetically engineered brains to basically convince Cisco that there's no way that the Federation can win the war. They should go ahead and surrender. It'll save 900 billion lives over the 2 billion in casualties it'll cost them if they try to do something else. Cisco, of course, rejects this plan and is like, we're not going to do this like at all. Um, Bashir takes this information back to the crazy people in the room, and they're like, well, screw Cisco, we need to do what we can as citizens to stop this bloody war before it becomes a terrible travesty. They knock Bashir out and tie him up, and three of them go while they leave. Bashir and one of the other genetically modified people, I think her name is Serena, they leave her in the room. Cisco, not Cisco, but Bashir is able to convince her to untie him in time so that they can catch the other ones before they meet with Damar and Wayoon to deliver Federation battle plans and battle strategies to them. To which they're later confronted by Odo, of course, who is basically like, "Yeah, they're not coming," and Wayoon tries to pretend like he has no idea who he's talking about. This, of course, leads the augments to really be upset with Bashir, even though they're not being brought up on any kind of charges or anything, which I think is a grave mistake, but whatever. Um, and he basically kind of points out that, hey, our progression system that we were using that you thought was so accurate didn't even account for what was going to happen in this room when Serena freed me. You thought you knew everything, but right here you couldn't tell what one person was going to do. So how do we know that we can't really win this war? Um, the group grudgingly agrees, and they basically agree to continue to watch, monitor, and offer suggestions. And if they do come up with a way to beat the Dominion, asking Bashir if he'll listen to them, to which he agrees. And the episode ends with them returning to whatever facility it was they were at before coming to the station.
Right.
Um, and then, of course, we've got a couple of moments with Bashir and O'Brien where, he's kind of just coming down from the high he was on, where he was like, it was so great to be with people who are like me, to now realizing he is really kind of not like them. And he's actually quite lucky to have the life and the friends that he does have.
Right.
And that's it.
Right. Yeah. Excuse me there for a moment. But yeah.
That's okay.
Um, yeah.
Things
So great, great, interesting episode, but ties in very nicely to Ad Aspera Ad Astra, which is the Strange New Worlds episode
and
that
that's ad astra per aspera. So
per
just
Aspera.
to,
I'm
just
sorry.
to, it's
It
okay.
said Ad Aspera Ad. I think it said Ad twice, didn't I?
Yeah.
Yeah. Per.
So I am going to go ahead and just give us a quick breakdown of this episode because it deals with just a lot of lore in Trek, which we're going to get into. Again, this is one of those coming off of dealing with the eugenics wars, which we have to explain. The eugenics wars was basically the World War III for Earth, and this is when you remember Khan, from the Wrath of Khan. This is where his people were also very active. And the eugenics wars is this time when people had, you know, s- had used genetic manipulation and modifications to enhance themselves, whether that was with strength or with intellect, or in most cases, a combination of both. Just overall, a general enhancement of the human physical form. This led to several generations of this. And as we see in these individuals in the Deep Space Nine episode, those that tend to be genetically augmented start to think of themselves as better than everyone else. And this caused a schism. There was a great separation here of those that were modified versus those that weren't. It led to cataclysmic events on Earth, which almost decimated the human population on the planet. This, of course, left, some billions and billions of humans dead, and led to kind of a new dark ages before Zephram Cochrane and the first warp flight that eventually brings Vulcans to Earth for the first time, and then starts the history that we know in Trek. So this is a very pivotal moment in this decision of, we do not allow for genetic modifications at all for Starfleet. It all stems from these wars. Um, so Starfleet, and it's not necessarily Starfleet because at the time there was no Starfleet. Basically, this is a humans learned a lesson. Don't mess with the genetic code. When you tinker around too much, when you try to play God, when you do these kind of crazy things, you set yourself up for failure, and you get these. And in this instance, you got these people who thought that, since they were better than you, they could wipe out everybody else, and they almost succeeded. And it's never really discussed how the war was won, just that it was won by regular people over the augments. It's kind of insinuated in certain episodes because the whole eugenics thing plays out in a couple of different Trek franchises. I know Enterprise does a couple episodes and so forth, but it's kind of intimated that the main reason that the augments fail is that they become increasingly competitive with each other, and
Mm,
their arrogance and their this need to dominate becomes kind of parasitic within their own group, and so they're
interesting.
while they're fighting us, they're also, or while they're fighting normal people, they're also fighting themselves, which leads to a decimation of their numbers, and that's why Khan is able to escape with kind of like a ragtag group,
Right.
later on. But yeah, so that's kind of what is insinuated, even though that has never been explicitly pointed out in Trek lore yet. Okay.
Gotcha.
So in this episode, Ad Astra here, we see that there is a another race called Illyrians who, as part of their own cultural heritage, they practice genetic manipulation and modification. Now, while this episode, Ad Astra, does focus on what happens when a person who does that is exposed in Starfleet, it's important to note that the Illyrians, one, are not humans, and two, this is a part of their cultural identity in very much the same way that humans go to inhospitable planets and practice terraforming, so to make the planet suitable for human life. The Illyrians do it the other way. They augment themselves to make themselves suitable for whatever planet they're going to live on.
Mm, okay.
So you can take that how you want on which method is better. Um, but yeah, that's what they basically are doing. They are augmenting themselves to fit into whatever environment where they potentially want to live.
Gotcha.
Um, Now, this isn't necessarily a problem until they want to join the Federation. And again, by this time in the 23rd century, there is a block against genetically modified people. And especially if you want to be in Starfleet. For Starfleet, it's a huge no no. You cannot be a serving officer and be genetically modified. Our main character in this episode, Una Chin Riley, who is the first officer of the Enterprise under Captain Pike, is Illyrian, is genetically modified, and has hidden this from everyone. And at this point in the timeline when the episode starts, she had revealed this to Captain Pike, and it's been about, I think they said, 4 months
Right.
since he had known. So once it becomes known that she is Illyrian, and obviously by default she's been genetically modified, Una has been arrested, and now she's getting ready to stand trial. And it's not so much as she's standing trial just for being Illyrian, but she's standing trial for the fact that she lied to get into Starfleet, and to serve. Now her record since being in Starfleet has been, spotless. She hasn't done anything. She has not continued to genetically modify herself in any way or anything like that. She's just an Illyrian serving in Starfleet. Um, so now that again that this has been exposed, it's calling into question not just her service, but also the people around her. There's suspicion about Pike, Admiral Robert April, who sponsored Una to get into the Federation, is also at one point, kind of indicted a little bit there. So we're watching a trial procedural episode, which, as we've said before, Star Trek does pretty well, and we are watching as Una's lawyer, Katul, is trying to basically exonerate her client. They get to a point where they're talking about the different things that Una has done, how she has really helped and impacted, positively impacted people in Starfleet and so forth. We have a Vulcan JAG officer who is basically like, yeah, that all sounds good and great, but cut the emotions out of it. And you can't deny the fact that she lied and Captain Pike covered it up. And we've got evidence of conspiracy, and she needs to go to jail for 20 years. And he needs to be court martialed because we've got rules and we've got laws, and the laws say this, this, and this. The lawyer is able to prove basically through the testimony of the various people that Una has served with and Una's testimony that she was actually seeking asylum, which was granted by Captain Pike. And now this tribunal that has been convened conveniently enough, just needs to satisfy the last part and officially recognize the asylum granted by Pike,
Right.
which they do. There's a nice little speech at the end about why genetically modified individuals needed to be watched and monitored, but that Starfleet is not a one size fits all organization. They recognize that things change and need to be on a more case by case basis. And based upon her case, she is granted the asylum and all charges against her are dropped, which allow her to return to her first officer status on the Enterprise.
Right.
That is essentially the episode. Obviously, we are going to get into a lot here. So, yes, bear with us. But before we start picking it apart, I just have to ask, what did you think of both episodes?
Yeah. Okay. So, statistical probabilities. It was interesting. Well, I'll put it this way. So the Wikipedia page for statistical probabilities talks about how the writer was thinking of the Foundation novels by Isaac Asimov and the concept introduced there called psychohistory. Now, you guys might remember that I read the Foundation books in when the show that they were going to do for Apple TV was coming out. So I read those books about a year or two ago now. Man, it's been a while. And it's interesting because the whole idea behind psychohistory is the idea that you can mathematically predict the future. That if you could create, if you were able to, and have just a minute understanding of human behavior, you could predict the future. Now, what's interesting is that that idea is challenged in the books. In book two, the predicting the future starts falling apart. But turns out there's like a contingency plan to get things back on track in a sense. It's been a while since I've read them, so I don't remember all the details. But anyway, when these characters started talking about, oh, we've worked the equations and we realized that, like, the one thing Bashir says, he says, we when the statistical probabilities are actually more accurate further in time because
Hmm.
the variations start to work themselves out. That's interesting. That's very psychohistory actually. The point of psychohistory is the idea that's actually the opposite of what this episode actually concludes. Psychohistory says that one man is meaningless in the overall history of mankind. That history is kind of a a force that can't be, like, one man can't truly bend the will of history. History is actually like a river that flows around the rocks of maybe individual human beings, and maybe that time has to hit the rock and it is somehow affected by it, but not so much that the river itself changes course, which is very, very, very anti most storytelling. Most people want to say what this episode says at the end of, well, actually, no, one man can change the
Yeah,
course of
that's
history.
like the famous saying, "One man can summon the future." You know,
Yes. Well,
yeah,
it's also interesting because the TV show, the Apple TV show that's based on the books, it's called Foundation, does that. It literally goes against the books in season one and starts saying stuff like one man can change history. No, the whole point Isaac Asimov was trying to make was like, it's actually kind of fun. The first book is all about, it's like a series of short stories, but like that take place 50, 100 years after each other, and how he was the main character, or the guy who comes up with psychohistory, predicts all of these these crises coming up, like civil wars and religious problems, and he predicts all these things, and the characters act in ways that he predicted, and so it's actually kind of fun to like think maybe that's possible. But so as I was watching this episode, I was thinking about that, and then when it ended with, oh well, we couldn't even predict what she would do in this room. I was like, yeah, that's how most stories like to go. One man can change history. Um, so I like that they brought in the Isaac Asimov stuff. It's a very complicated, interesting, unique idea. And storytelling really does operate under the idea that people could change and affect the here and now. So maybe Bashir and the others are right that the Dominion will somehow win. I don't think they will, because I don't think that's how we're going to end this show. But the idea being that um, some things maybe are inevitable. It's a fun idea. I mean, really, could you? Is it really possible? It seems I don't think it's possible to mathematically understand human nature. I think that's something that can't be mathematically understood. And how do you predict the unknowable? How do you predict the unknown, the unseen? That's basically what happens in book two of the Foundation series. Is there's someone who there is a man who appears with special abilities, and he throws things off, but I don't know. It's the books are interesting. They have a lot to say, but all that to say, this episode is very interesting because we're focusing on the idea of can the future be predicted, and then behind that is the genetically modified people, and they they give Bashir a hard time because they say, "Look, you were able to act normal and live a normal life. The rest of us, we were found out and had to live in an institute together." And that's clearly been a it's left some of them stunted. At least three of the characters are pretty emotionally stunted. The main guy
Yeah.
talks a lot. One guy is older, but he has very childlike approach to life. The one girl doesn't even talk, and then of course there's the other female who's very beautiful, dressed up, fashionable, and is always laying down on that central
Yeah. Yeah.
thing. Like
Hmm.
she's only standing in like I guess two scenes. She dances with Bashir, and then when they're running to try and find the Dominion, find Wayun and tell him about their plans. But other than that, she's always laying down and very sexual, very promiscuous seeming. But it's not clear. Like, I mean, I guess it's insinuated that that's part of who she is, maybe because of the genetic modification. Like, she's more beautiful because of genetic modification, and she really leans into it, maybe too much. But I don't know, interesting. But the most important thing of all of that is Bashir. Is Bashir getting hot headed? Is he getting too much in his own mythos, basically? Um, he's not a god. He says it was fun to play God, but we're not gods. So um, yeah,
So it's interesting because I always took it as the reason that these four are in the institute is not so much because they are genetically modified, but because whatever the modifications they got, it was kind of subpar, and
that's
so
true.
it
Yeah,
left them with issues.
right,
Like you have Jack, who is intensely paranoid, and he's always, suspicious and darting around, and he questions himself. And even when he comes up with a plan, he kind of it's very easy to throw him off his track and mess with him. Then you have Patrick, who, for all of his intelligence and clearly in a common an innate engineering ability, he also seems to have been stuck at like the age of 8, maybe.
right,
Developmentally, he's very childlike. You have the other one, I can't remember what her name is, but she's the very um seductive sexual one. She's
Lauren.
yes, Lauren. She's very very much into body language and flirting and so forth. And then you have Serena, who is basically a functioning mute. She's just as intelligent and capable as the others, but she seems to have withdrawn within herself, and we never hear her speak in the entire episode.
Hmm.
so so, it just seems like something about whatever modifications they got were wrong, and it
Yeah,
never worked out for them the way that it worked out for Bashir. And
right,
Bashir, being genetically modified, is able to work with them because they accept him as one of them, and he's able to look past their other issues and can understand them. And that's what he talks about even in the episode. It was nice to be with people that, it was faster for him because they still access information the same way and did things, but they didn't have to worry so much about playing to other people that were not modified around them.
right,
So and that's also why the counselor brought them to the station in the first place. The hope was that because Bashir was more like them, he'd be able to make a connection, establish dialogue, which he did. You know, so it's an interesting take on this whole ban on genetic modification, which we haven't really seen much of until Deep Space Nine. We knew about it with Bashir because it was revealed. What was that, last season? I guess.
Yep.
And we're hearing about the rules and everything else about it. And so it's nice to see that this is a theme that has continued throughout Trek, and we see it again in the Strange New Worlds episode. Um, so now, what did you think of the Strange New Worlds episode at Astra?
Yeah, I liked it. It was. I'll say this first. The music is definitely very different, very much more cinematic, much more. They use the music to cue your emotional responses way more than we get in Deep Space Nine. Deep Space Nine, it has music, but they didn't give it nearly as much attention as Strange New Worlds gives it in that episode. Um, it was very interesting. There are definitely points where I felt, especially near the end, when the lawyer character is making her final speech, where in some ways it felt like she was just nailing it on the head so hard that it was gonna crack the hammer. If you know what I mean, like
Hmm.
just let it slide, let it slide home by itself. You don't have to hit it there so hard. Maybe you're overplaying your hand. But the lawyer character and the actor who played Patrick in Deep Space Nine, both of them, I felt like this was a perfect example of actors who came on as bit characters who got a lot of great lines, a lot of action. Like Patrick in this episode, is it Patrick or is it? Yeah, it's
I
Patrick,
was gonna
right?
say, do you
Oh,
mean Pat?
Jack.
Do
I'm
you mean
sorry, Jack.
Patrick? Okay, I was gonna say,
Jack,
wait a
Jack.
second.
Sorry, Jack. Jack is talking. Like he has like effectively monologues at the beginning of this episode. He talks so
Yeah,
much. He's basically almost in the first 5 minutes, like he's like the main character. And then the lawyer character, she's like the driving force behind pretty much everything that happens. All the other characters are having to play just fiddle to her driving this lawyerly defense home. So
I thought
I
she was
would
great.
yeah, I and she's got an emotional history with the character, what's her name?
Una,
Una,
Una Chin Riley. She is
and it
Commander,
and it's
First Officer.
revealed by Una's testimony that when Una's family got a chance to try and hide amongst the normal people, they tried it and left the others behind. Now, there is one thing I want to quickly mention. When you said that, like the Illyrians,
Illyrians. Yes,
okay, they're
Illyrians.
not humans because they
No,
definitely look it like I don't know
they
how you would get away with like if you're obviously an alien species called the Illyrians, who are they able to mask themselves as when they try and
so the Illyrian people are a little bit of they're obviously it's a bit of a mystery. We've never really Star Trek's never really done much with them. There is kind of a there's another episode of Star Trek Enterprise where Archer encounters a group of Illyrians, and ends up stealing from them. But they don't look anything like Nira or Una.
right,
Now, this has been explained away as they don't look like them because Illyrians modify themselves to live wherever. So they can change themselves to look like whatever it is they want to fit into whatever environment they're trying to get into.
right,
So that could explain why Nira and Una look human, because if you remember, as they said early on in the episode, they were attempting to enter the Federation. They were
right,
on a Federation colony world. So it could be assumed that most of the people that were on that colony world were human. So they were trying to pass as human. So they made themselves look human. Now, Nira also, or not Nira, but Una also says that there were some who lived on the planet who could not pass. Her and her family could pass, so they did,
I
whereas
guess
there were
what
others who could not.
I guess what I'm getting at is that if anyone could at any time genetically confirm your identity, I would think that the markers making you Illyrian versus human should be so obvious that anyone who got a chance to just look at
Mm,
those details would know. But are you saying that that's
Not necessarily, because as we've seen many times in Trek, how many, like so many times, the officers have augmented themselves for the sake of a covert spy mission to look like a Trill or a Vulcan or a Romulan or a Klingon. We just watched Cisco and company
oh
modify themselves to be able to pass, to get close to Gowron. So I just feel like it's one of those things that it's you know it's the plot device, right? They can test for it with pinpoint accuracy only when it's absolutely necessary. Any other time, we don't really care. So since we've decided
And
that this is something
that's
that
what
we
I
don't
would
like,
conclude.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So we've
Okay.
decided it's something that we don't like. So in this case, yes, we can 100% scan you with accuracy and know you're an augment. Any other time,
We're just too lazy to care. Yeah.
yeah, right, right.
Yeah.
Our
I
very
feel like
open
that's what
source
makes sense.
technology.
Yeah, I feel like that's an answer that makes sense, and also is like, I mean, if you're testing your officer core, I imagine you want to know just to make sure. But
Well, because
who
like
knows?
again, and that's the other thing about Starfleet in general that always makes me mad. They never really check for things until well after the fact. They just they just assume that everybody is telling them the truth. They give you the 100% benefit of the doubt, and
That's right.
unless you do
That's right.
something that
Yeah.
causes you to be a red flag in the overall hive mind of Starfleet, you can get away with stuff. And that's what Una even proves. She had been
Yeah.
in Starfleet for 25 years. She had an
Right.
exemplary record. No one was looking at her, and then something happened that
Right.
turned their
And as we
attention
find
to
out,
her.
she turned herself in,
And
which
that's
is
what it was. She did it. If she had just
yeah.
shut up, there would have
Yeah.
never been a problem. But she wanted to um, be known as an Illyrian
I have
and
to
serve
say
open.
that part, like, it was poignant, and also like, how the hell does that make any sense? Like,
Well, I mean, I don't think, and I think this is something that also that Trek stumbles with. I don't want to say continuously gets wrong, but I will say stumbles with.
sure.
This, you have these characters who have a desire to be completely open about who they are or what they're about or whatever, and I don't feel like they do a good job of communicating that story to us as to why. Because it's so easy for us to say, like we just said now, if you had just shut up, no one would know. You had a great life, you had a great career, you were respected, you were in a position of power and authority. No
Right.
one cared that you were an Illyrian, but you made it a point to say something, and
Right.
we, as people who are not this and whatever, we can't understand why you would do that. And
Right.
I don't know what that would take in storytelling for them to get that right.
Yeah.
But they've done that before. They've kind of stumbled through with characters having to reveal that they have this thing, and
Right.
they want to be known completely as
Yeah.
their full self.
Right.
Which, I mean, I don't know. I don't know what that would be like. And to have that desire to. I feel like we all have secrets. We're not
Right.
going out here with a billboard of every single thing about us for people to read. And I just don't think that that's, I guess, normal or natural. We don't do that. But I mean, at the same time, you have your friends and you have your family who probably know most of those things about you. So I don't know how we would draw that particular um, line on that, and
Right.
I think that's maybe why the stories don't translate well when shows like Star Trek do them, because we just don't really have a whole lot of examples of that to
Right.
go off of, at least that I can see. I may be wrong. Maybe some people know some stuff and have seen some stuff where it's done very well and can explain that to me a little bit more or push me into the direction to watch those things. If you know them, please feel free, send them my way. But as far as I know, I have not. I've not seen it. I've not experienced it, so I don't know.
Right. Yeah. I guess what I would say to kind of follow up there, if Una had come up with the law that said something about you need to go to asylum. Like if she had done that, that might have made more physical sense. But the reveal in the episode was more dramatic. So having the lawyer figured out was more storytelling wise, more dramatic. But I think it would have made more sense if she realized, oh, here's how I might be able to finally come forward. Like she didn't say, oh, I this burden had been put on Captain Pike and he had known for several months and I knew that I was compromising him by not moving forward with making a statement. But then it's also like, well, why are you trying to say, who revealed you? We don't know who revealed, as opposed to just honestly saying, I need to confess this, as opposed to in the middle of court confessing it. Let me put it this way: the episode was great and flawed for all the reasons that courtroom dramas are great and flawed. It had characters acting in ways that aren't quite believable in order to make the courtroom drama be more pizzazzy. It had more pizzazz because the characters acted in ways that weren't quite. In some ways, it seemed a little bit off. Like for example, like getting the admiral dude to confess to breaking the prime directive, which was great, but um, but that gets his testimony thrown out. Like I would think that would like put the defense like way back. Like you did something so offensive here. We're throwing out his whole testimony. Like, but I mean, I guess that was her whole point. She was trying to make a statement about his testimony.
Well,
Um,
and I think that they were also trying to give us the Una is completely innocent, and so if it was revealed that she had done any of that and had previously looked up the rules and codes and statutes and then had done what she had done, then it would have been
mm,
less she was trying to be honest and come clean and be this truly upstanding individual, and more she was intentionally manipulating the system in order to
work in her
get a
favor. Yeah.
get a favorable outcome. So the way that it's related to us when the lawyer Nira when she tells us about it, it's kind of led that way. That Una, she took these steps without realizing she was taking these steps.
Right.
And it's so that way it's like she's doing this in complete good faith because
Yeah.
of her
She's
full
so
belief in
sh-
Starfleet. Yeah.
she's so in tune with the Federation's like laws on the subject that she did them subconsciously without knowing.
Yes.
Yeah, definitely.
Yes.
Um, It's interesting though as we talk about that because I remember that one of the things it says in that like the three-tiered system of like of getting this approved is stuff like for your sexual like because of sex or race or this or that,
Or cultural identity,
and
heritage.
it said genetics. But what's interesting about all of that, and this is what it really comes down to, and this is why the conversation around the augmentation is actually a very fascinating conversation. Honestly, it deserves it like this episode in Ad Astra per Aspera addressing it head on is fantastic. And then the way they end it by being like, we didn't solve all of our problems. This was only in many ways
One
just
particular
a
case.
right. But it is a fascinating idea. Because what I'm getting to is like if race and religion and belief system and politics and all of that are like those are things that don't inherently give you advantages over other people. But if you were able to genetically modify a person to have physical advantages that are otherwise unattainable, like you couldn't train your way to be the same.
You couldn't naturally do it, right?
Right. That actually does raise a very interesting problem. And I think Ad Astra directly talked about it, or it might have been the other one because we just watched both of them. But like people paying so that their children would have the advantage
That was the Deep
that
Space Nine one. That was what,
okay,
yeah, what Worf was talking about.
yeah, that was also great. That was a great scene. We should talk about that. That was the problem of then you're paying to have advantage of other people, and it becomes a race of the rich versus the poor, and that truly turns people into genetically superior and inferior. The reason I also love this is that's actually the plot of the Red Rising books, because the idea is that the golds at the top of society are genetically modified super beings. Basically, they're all over 7 feet tall. Their bones are almost metallic. They have superhuman, running speeds, etc. While the reds are basically the unchanged basic humans. Everyone else above them has some sort of modification in a stratified version of a society
Mm,
that enforces this hierarchical structure. Um, and the main character, to spoil a little bit of the first book, in order for him to get to infiltrate the gold society, he has to go through a full year of genetic modifications that are excruciating. Like his body has to be ripped open and torn apart and rebuilt from like the ground up in order to get to that level. Um, yeah. So anyway, I thought it was great. It was like, this is the books I'm reading took this idea and it doesn't address it directly. It doesn't necessarily talk about the genetic modifying is bad per se. It doesn't like
well,
directly in that direction. It just is like society shouldn't be so stratified. We need to allow people to move through
Diversified.
it. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, um, but
Yeah, that scene, you're correct. That opening scene there with Worf and the senior staff, and I believe they're in Cisco's quarters, and they're talking about
yes,
everybody, and they're talking about these, genetically modified individuals, and they point out that uh, it would lead to people paying to give their children an edge over others, and it would cause a dichotomy to develop in the society, which would lead to, and did lead to, because they're speaking about this from a historical reference,
yeah,
that this is what happened. You had people who wanted their children to compete and to be better and to gain an advantage, and then this kind of became a slippery slope where we went from correcting legitimate defects to we're giving our kids a competitive edge,
right,
and it's set up the world for its inevitable downfall and
right,
the rise of the eugenics wars.
right,
And and Bashir points out also, I feel accurately, he's like, it's not their fault. Their parents took them to these things, and they're children who innately trust their parents, and they have a problem, and there's this person who's saying they're going to solve it with medicine and science and so forth. We're going to solve it, and we're going to make you better. And
right,
now they're punished for the rest of their lives, restricted from being able to take part in certain aspects of society. And as we also know, in the Trek universe, on Earth at least, a lot of things have been solved. There's no need to work a certain way or live a certain way, or there's no starvation, there's no poverty, there's no none of this. So the main thing that people have is to contribute to society, to keep it going, but they are precluding this group of people who really had no say in what happened to them. And Cisco points out, it's like, yeah, it isn't fair. It's not a perfect um solution that we have,
mhm,
but it was the solution we found that worked because you were now directly responsible for your child's unhappiness. For the rest of their life, they wouldn't be able to do things because of you and your decision. And it was kind of highlighting again how society had changed so much, because you then you had the people who still wanted the best for their child, but now we're doing it under normal circumstances. And when you've eliminated all those other needs, you don't have to worry about your kid going to bed hungry or with a roof over their head or being able to go to a school or not, because all these things are taken care of and all that other kind of stuff. Yeah, it eliminated the need really for genetic modifications.
right,
So to see people were still doing it in the 24th century, it made no sense, and that's why people were still being punished. So, um, and we see that it's not done very well. Bashir seems to have been, in that kind of last generation where it was done the way it needed to be, a good balance of correcting his issues and enhancing him
right,
without overstepping and without tilting him into some kind of neuropathy the way that it did Lauren, Patrick, Jack, and Serena.
right,
So, and we don't know. I mean, we haven't. This is it's not like we've seen a bunch of these people running around. We clearly know that a lot of them end up in institutions, so we don't have a whole lot to compare. It would be interesting to find out that maybe there were several other passable augments like Julian running throughout the Federation and doing stuff. They had their own little group that met up and worked in, I don't know what, intelligence and security and the medical whatever.
mhm,
Actually, you know what, now that I say it, I'm pretty sure there's probably a series of books out there that actually talks exactly about that, and Bashir later finding out that there is a group, that like a cabal inside of Starfleet of augments that are doing things for the greater good.
yeah,
But that also seems to be the recurring theme for these groups, is that no matter what, ultimately that sense of superiority wins out. When they are by themselves, when they're isolated, kind of like the way that Bashir is, they don't seem to have much of an issue with that. But when
right,
they get around each other and
yeah,
they're known to each other, that
yeah,
superiority complex tends to just become more and more apparent, and it
yeah,
becomes we've got to do these things because they're just children, we're practically gods, and
right,
we need to take care of them, because if we don't, they'll kill themselves.
Yeah.
And
Well,
we're doing it because we love them, not because we
yeah.
think we're better, but because we
Yes.
we want
Yeah.
to help them so
It really
much.
is funny you talk about that because basically every single permutation of how this would go happened in this episode. They got together. They thought they were superior. Bashir objected, and so they fractured apart. They did. They thought they were acting on behalf of the good of other people, and they collapse underneath the weight of their own superiority, which
Hmm.
is it was fun. It's fun to think that that's basically it. It happened just boop right there. It happened all at once.
Because the theme of the genetic modification is always that it not only enhances the good, it enhances the bad. And one of the things that humans have always struggled with is being humble. Humility is not a strong trait in a lot of us. We all seem to want to seek some level of fame and notoriety, and some level of that. And so when you modify people and you enhance attributes, you also enhance those things. So a person who maybe would have only been kind of a big name in their small town suddenly becomes obsessed with becoming a big name everywhere on a
Right.
national or a global level even, and it just kind of feeds on itself in this, well, I'm so much smarter, stronger, faster. Why don't I have more control? And anytime that you see this kind of advancement happen, that tends to be the next step, which ultimately leads to their downfall. And
Right.
it's not that they were taken down because they were ultimately proven to not be as fast or smart or whatever. They were taken down because they became so arrogant, they were overconfident, and
Right.
they made a mistake, and
Right.
that's what brings them down.
Yeah.
So it's funny because they kind of become Cardassian in a way. Cardassians, that's always their ultimate downfall. They become so complacent and overconfident that, yeah, they
Yeah.
fail.
Yeah. That might be Gul Dukat's problem as an individual to the
Yes.
Uberist amount because that's exactly how he lost Deep Space Nine just a few episodes ago. But I really love the idea of the genetic modifying humanity being an issue because it really is. Like I'm glad the or the per aspera ad astra episode talked about this because or did they did the other way around I think actually. But anyway, um the whole point of the prime directive is we want to allow societies to develop by themselves so they don't feel like they were led around by superior beings and they feel dependent on others to make them who they are. They came to their own in they came in they matured of themselves
You're right. They
and
developed on their own to achieve this particular level that makes them equal to us, not
exactly
us being better than them.
right.
Yeah.
And the genetic modification problem just is the Gordian knot that problem the prime directive solves that on a relationship between races scale these alien races, but genetic modification is a Gordian knot. Like there is no maybe Star Trek has come up with some sort of answer for it. Are they going to allow for genetic modification in the future, or like maybe limited quantities, or as we pointed out, maybe they just aren't allowed to work together. You can have one over here, and he's by himself, but he's not allowed to have friends who are also genetically
Yeah, he's not
modified.
allowed to. Yeah. Now, and my issue with it has always been, Starfleet talks about being an all-inclusive group, but at the same time, they, as we saw in the Ad Astra episode, they have exclusions. They have people that they do keep out and that they monitor, which doesn't make any sense if you are accepting of everyone else, because it's not fair to say that one culture is right and valid in their thing than others. But we've seen Starfleet do this time and again. If they come to a
Uh-huh.
planet, for example, and that planet, for all of its advances, and they've got their own warp capable ships and satellites and space stations and so forth, and they seem to be an obvious candidate for membership into the Federation. Oh, but we found out you guys still have slavery or a caste system. Well, we'll talk to you and we'll try to work with you, but as long as those things exist, you can't be in the Federation.
Right.
That's been said many times. Like there was even an episode of Next Generation where they were talking with the leaders of a planet, and they were all it was the female led planet, and the males were kind of a substandard group, but they had been gaining traction and gaining some equal standing to the women. And while the Enterprise was there to talk to them and to also rescue some humans who had landed on the planet,
Uh-huh.
they were basically like, we will maintain friendly ties with you, but we can't move forward with you being a part of the Federation until all of your people are equal. When Cisco shows up to Deep Space Nine, that's the whole purpose of him being there, is to get the Bajoran people ready for Federation membership. They don't instantly become members. There's a lot of things they have to hurdle over before they can become members. And as that one guy who comes back from the Celestial Temple and finds out that the Bajorans have abandoned their Dajaras, the caste system. He's like, you've got to go back to your Dajaras. And Cisco's like, you can't do that and be in the Federation. So,
Yeah.
it's clear that they have particular rules which we think are great, but other other groups may have been doing these things for a while. So how do you draw that line? How do you say, okay, we'll totally accept everything that you are for your group, you Romulan offshoots. That sounds great. You can all join us. But you guys over here, you Klingons who ritualistically kill your third born child just because, we can't you can't keep doing that and
Right.
be in our group. But
Yeah.
that's also their culture. That's their heritage. That's how they identify and do their whatever. So that's never been explained.
Yeah.
And I think this episode is the closest that we've ever gotten where they've tried to deal with it. And basically the answer that we got was, we're going to deal with this on a case by case basis, guys. That's kind of
Yeah.
it. That's all we got.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point you make about like the caste system on Bajor. Like they've invented warp flight, but they still have a caste system. So are they good? Can they come in? Are they? I guess we can contact them. They're equals to us in terms of the warp speed stuff, but they're not good enough for the Federation because they still have a caste system. Interesting idea that the Federation would have standards for contact and for being in the Federation in general. Like as you point out, like what cultural differences are so great that you can't like you're not it wouldn't jive with the Federation overall. So
And
yeah.
it just makes the juxtaposition of other groups that we are on good terms with. I say we, but the Federation is on good terms with. Like, for example, again, Klingons. It doesn't make sense considering that Klingons practice ritual killings and ritual suicide. And there's this whole ascension through the ranks via murder as well, which
uh,
does not happen at all on Federation starships. But we have entered into a, amicable peace with them, at least in the 24th century. And we know that it took a lot to get there. And I mean, that's what Discovery, the first season of Discovery, is about, is the whole war with the Klingons. So not necessarily easy, but I'm just saying there are still significant cultural differences that had to be, yeah, I guess easy to say, had to be overcome. But
uh,
really, it's just the Federation had to accept that was how they were going to handle things and do things and get over it. So I feel like this whole genetic engineering is another one. It's easy to say, okay, humans, no genetic engineering. You guys, you're terrible at it. You end up killing a bunch of people when you do it. You almost
right.
wiped out half your populace, and destroyed your planet because of genetic engineering. So we understand why you say no for you, but we Illyrians and other groups and so forth, we have been doing this for however long, and we've never had the issues that you guys had, and it has
uh,
become a part of our heritage and our culture. And we look at this the same way you look at, slapping a bandage on a knee or whatever. We don't. It doesn't affect us like it affects you. Maybe y'all should look at your psyche and why this gets to you the way that it does. But because we do it and do it safely and handle it well, that should not exclude us from being in the Federation. And the Federation is obviously always expanding. 150 member worlds, they say at one time. So by kicking out or keeping out one group, one planet, one society, you are effectively blocking them off from all of these other races and cultures and so forth. And can you really argue that that's fair? I mean, because they can't even go to that planet directly and be like, hey, um, we, we know that you're in the Federation, but we don't want to deal with the Federation. We want to deal with you,
Right.
Andorians. We want to deal just with you. But they're
Yeah.
like, nope, sorry, you can't because we are in the Federation and it's not allowed.
Yeah.
So
So the Illyrians, that's a perfect example. They're
yeah,
not in the Federation, right? So
yeah. So they would be excluded from ever having any dealings with um Tellarites, Andorians, Vulcans,
I have to say, the
you
idea
name it.
that genetically modifying individuals to be compatible with a planet, as opposed to trying to make the planet compatible for humanity or whoever, actually is an interesting idea. Like maybe that actually makes more sense.
I thought that it made more sense. I did. I thought that it made more sense. I was like,
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah.
Instead of stripping the planet and totally changing its environment and atmosphere and natural evolutionary process that the planet followed, instead of totally changing that to make it habitable for one group, they have adapted themselves to the planet, to the environment, and they leave no impact on the environment. And
Yeah.
when they decide to leave, the environment is the same
Left
as
us
when they
anyway.
got there, you
Yeah, I
know?
guess it really comes down to like if you need oxygen to breathe, is there some sort of oxygen type replacement, or can you take less of it? I guess on a scientific level, it's a question that might be more hard to answer than science fiction does. But science fiction,
Oh
you can
yeah.
answer any question you want, right? Who cares?
Yeah, it's science
Yeah,
fiction magic. What do
yeah,
you like when Pike shows up at Nira's office in
yeah.
the Voltanis
Well,
system, you know?
as we talk about that, maybe this is a problem because the more I think about it, I'm like, well, if the Illyrians were able to get the genetic modification thing throughout their whole society solved, there is no caste system based on that, or at least none that we saw. Maybe there
None
is,
that
and we
we
didn't
saw.
see it.
We did not see any of that. It seemed like they were able to operate and function just fine. They
Yeah,
didn't have a cast. They had the equivalent of Starfleet technology. They just weren't in Starfleet.
yeah. Oh man, this is the problem, Perry. Suddenly, I start
See,
seeing cracks.
See, I'm saying it doesn't make any sense, and to a degree, it almost sets the Illyrians up as a potential enemy because they, the Federation is expanding, and as I said
Well,
earlier, the Federation is expanding, and more members are becoming or joining up. But
right.
eventually, that's going to lead to an isolation of people like the Illyrians, and they're not going to be able to do business, do trade, do anything because the Federation effectively blocks them off because it's like, hey,
Well,
you're
even
Illyrian. We don't allow
private
for it.
businesses, yeah, even private businesses were like, we, you know, um,
We
persecute
won't
people
serve you.
based.
Yeah, we
Yeah.
won't serve you. We won't do
Well,
business
that's
with
also
you.
why I think it's more interesting. I mean, maybe Star Trek lore just isn't this way, but if the Illyrians were humans who were like an offshoot of humanity who had gone off and were not part of the Federation, they were some planet that had been a colony and they've been so successful. Maybe like from day one they were genetically modifying themselves, so that's why there's no caste system because like just from day one they were already working on it for everybody. And like that's they're an excluded branch of humanity from the Federation. That's actually I think better than the idea of this race of people who've just
Well,
because they look this way. They look so human for crying out loud. At least in the episode
well,
I
again,
saw.
yeah, in the episode that you saw, which makes sense why you think that, but technically, the first time that we see the Illyrians, it's in the Enterprise episode, and it's explained that the Illyrians are native to the Delphic Expanse. And the Expanse is a big part of the third and fourth seasons of Star Trek Enterprise. And the whole reason that the Enterprise is even in the Expanse is because there is a threat to Earth that they're trying to um, ferret out and stop before it becomes the true threat to Earth that it is. And the Enterprise is badly damaged. They come across this ship, which is also damaged, which happens to be crewed by Illyrians. They try to make a deal of we're going to help you solve, your problem, fix your ship, but in return, we need your warp coil because we have this enemy that we have to, face, and
Right.
our warp coil is burned out. So if we don't have one, our mission is over and our people will die. And the
Right.
Illyrians are like, yeah, but if we give you our only warp coil, we'll be stranded in space. So no, we're not going to give it to you.
Right.
And Archer's like, well, you won't be stranded. It'll just take you a lot longer to get home. So we'll give you extra food so you can make it home. And they're like, yeah, no, we're still not going to do that. And Archer says, well, screw it. We're going to take it. And does, steals it. So Archer
What episode is
compromises.
that?
What was that called? Hold on. I had it here. Chosen Realm is the name of the
No, I mean
episode.
which show and which like.
Oh, Enterprise, Star Trek Enterprise.
So this is early on in the lore
Yes,
of
so this would
Star
have been
Trek.
the 22nd century, and this is the first time that we encountered the Illyrians. Now, Una comes up as an Illyrian in the 23rd century, so give or take 100 years difference there. So, and the Illyrians in the episode look vastly different. They've got like, there's hair, but then they've got these huge ridges on their heads, and they've got a weird nose thing going on. We don't get much about the history of Illyrians, but at this point, we see them as they are a spacefaring culture. They've got multiple colonies. The ship itself is on its way to yet another one of their colonies.
Right.
So they have their own kind of expanding circle of influence. They have a home planet, but they also have several colonies that they service and travel between and
Right.
everything else. So, again, if you think about it from that standpoint, kind of like, Earth, we're just, we're branching out. We might be at one point establishing colonies, on, Mars and whatever. Let's say we've colonized our entire solar system, right? And now we're moving beyond it, and we happen to find a planet some, 5 or 6 light years distant. But when we get there or we get close to there, we run into an alien group that's like, hey, that's all well, good and great that y'all want to come over here and establish a colony and ever. But just so you know, we don't allow for the use of, I don't know, what's something that we do commonly? Vaccines. Yeah. We don't believe in vaccines at all. Like we don't want you to do that at all. We believe that if you get sick, that you
The
should,
gods have said you survive or you don't. Yeah.
or yeah, or maybe not even the gods. It's just we believe that it should all be contained. We don't believe in puncturing the body at all. So the fact that you've got to do these weird, creepy injections of another life form into your body to cure your body, we don't like that. So cut that out. And then yeah, you
Right.
can be here. Well, I mean, that's something that we have been doing for centuries, right? And it's such a common thing. It's we don't even think of it as a cultural practice. It's human wide. And to suddenly be told by someone who seemingly is more powerful, more advanced than us, that we can't do this to us very
Uh-huh.
basic thing, it would be strange.
Right.
So that yeah. So that I mean I just said vaccines because I don't know. It just that's the only thing I think
Came
of
up.
that
Yeah, it's
modified
nice.
my body that I didn't. Yeah, yeah. But yeah, I'm just saying that something like that. That could be it. Or what's something that we do? Um, they don't allow for any kind of surgeries beyond life-saving ones, right? So all those people who get plastic surgery or anything like that, and they mean any kind of modification, you can't use contacts. You have to just if your eyes suck, you wear glasses or you're blind. You can't dye your hair. If you're a natural brunette, you better stay natural. No redheads, no blondes. You just unless you're born with it.
Right.
All that. Oh, you want to use suntan lotion to get darker or whatever. Nope, it's out. Your skin color is your skin color. If you can't get it naturally, if they said things like that to us, we'd be like, what are you talking about? Like, of course we're going to do these things. We've always done them.
Right.
So that's kind of how I take this stuff with the Illyrians. They go wherever it is they're going to go. They modify themselves to fit into wherever it is that again they're going to go if the modification is necessary. And then here we are flying in the face of that and saying, you can't do it. You can't be in the Federation if you do it. And the Federation is constantly surrounding and expanding them. So all of a
Right.
sudden, this wide open space where they could have made contact with Klingons and Ferengis and Tellarites and Andorians and Viserians and whomever else, suddenly they can't because they all have agreements with the Federation, and so everywhere they go, the Federation's shutting them out. So now you have this group that is suddenly very anti-Federation, all because the Federation won't let them practice their one cultural thing.
And that's exactly how what's her face, the lawyer character acts. Basically,
Yeah,
yeah,
that's almost her
yeah,
whole point. You
yeah,
can't sit there and say these things. Yeah,
yeah, yeah. This is a fascinating idea and subject. It really is. I mean, yeah.
it's a
There's
it's a great episode. It's
yeah,
it's one of my favorite of the new Trek episodes of
yeah,
stuff that has come out. I've
yeah.
talked about this episode with you a couple of times, um, and it gets me every time I watch it. I think that they just did a fantastic job with presenting everything in the episode, how unique Una was, yet how she had already been attached and developed with the crew. And
Hmm.
Nira Katul, the lawyer, I thought she did an outstanding job. I loved her entire presentation. You're right in what you said earlier. These characters who come on and these one-off guest spots, and they just absolutely nail it. And the scene
Yeah.
at the end, I swear that was a behind-the-scenes thing that they threw in when she's leaving and she steps up onto the transporter platform and everybody starts clapping for her. I'm like, nah, y'all were clapping her overall
The,
performance. That
yeah, the
actress nailed
actress in
it.
the
Yeah, the
role. Yeah,
actress nailed it, and y'all were
yeah,
y'all were applauding her.
yeah.
And
She had
someone
that
was,
husky kind of like low voice, almost
mhm.
whispering, but she had such a low voice. Yeah. Sorry, keep going, keep going.
No, but I'm just saying, like, that's what I felt about that scene was that someone had just kept filming and they just cut that in
Yeah.
and gave it to us because she did do a great job with everything. Even her delivery of how she didn't want to see Pike, how she's angry with Una, but still is willing to represent her, however begrudgingly. How the reveal, because she's angry at Una. We find out why she's angry with Una, and then we find out, how Una has kind of like silently suffered and how that affected her and all of it. I thought it was great. The only person I did not like in this episode was Jag Officer Pasalk, the Vulcan jerk who stands up and is like, "Oh, that's a very
Yeah.
emotional story, but screw your emotions. We were talking about facts." You
Yeah.
know, I did not like him. Now, I know what you're going to say. Of course, you're not supposed to like him. He's kind of the villain of the
Yeah.
episode. But that's not why I didn't like him.
I was
I
gonna say
I
the
did not
classic
like him.
Terry hates the character meant to be hated.
Yes, yes. They just made it that much easier because in this case, I thought that the person playing that Vulcan was awful.
Didn't
I
do a
mean,
good job.
no, I didn't like his portrayal of the Vulcan at all. Even to the point where I didn't like his makeup. Like I felt like his eyebrows were stuck on wrong, and I kept
Oh,
staring at his face like it's like, what's wrong with you? Why do you look off to me? And it's like, and I realized that's what it is. I feel like, whatever the glue is they use for the eyebrows, I feel like his was probably like melting. And so like one of his eyebrows was like kind of dipping down into the eye socket a little bit, and I was distracted. So
yeah.
yeah, I did not like him at all. It just he did not come
Well,
across well to me as a Vulcan in general. Didn't
gotcha.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny you talk about him because I did feel like the main Una pleads not guilty, but then later pleads basically guilty to a bad law, which is just an interesting idea because like so much like the reason the Supreme Court exists is in part to like say this law is bad, and it's such an it's still rare though. Most of the time when that happens, like this is a bad law, it's like states arguing on behalf of a new law they just came up with, and someone saying, "No, the new law you just came up with is stupid and it shouldn't exist, shouldn't be allowed to exist." As opposed to this is a law that's been around for a long time, and I have violated that law, but now I want to confront the court with the idea that it's a bad law in general. So it's interesting because when that Vulcan dude stands up, he's like, he basically tells the chick, the other the prosecution lawyer, he
Captain
basically
Patel.
he basically tells her like, "Sit down, I'm taking over from here."
Yeah, he doesn't even really say. He just like puts his hand out in that
Yeah.
very kind of airy, condescending way,
Oh
which
yeah.
also did not
Well, very
win
Vulcan,
him any
right?
points with me.
Yeah,
I didn't
yeah.
even feel like that was very Vulcan. From my
No,
understanding, Vulcans wouldn't. I mean, like he was. That was a very human thing to do to touch and dismiss her. I felt anyway. I just
was
don't think
he
that he
the
would have done it.
one that that what's his face? Our main Vulcan dude,
Spock.
Spock. The Spock was having the dinner with.
Yes,
Okay,
yes,
and
yes. He
I can't
is.
stand him. Forgive
Yeah.
me my outbursts. Kind of a funny scene,
Yes,
but also
he says he's one of my father's friends who brings out the worst in me.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
She was like, "What are you talking?" Yeah, because it's Doctor Mbanga and what is the pilot's name? I can't believe I just forgot her name. But they're watching watching them watch Spock, and she's like, they're just having such a great Vulcan time, and he's
Right.
like, they hate each other. Like, can't you tell? She's like,
Yeah.
no. Yeah, but and even in that, you saw them both sitting there. They were not touching. They were almost mirroring each other. They both were sitting directly across, hands down, in front of one another. And then yeah. So again, I just don't think that he did a good job
Yeah.
as a Vulcan, and I don't know. It bothered me. He came off more of that kind of airy, aristocratic, uh,
Actor.
British guy
Yeah.
actor that they always get when they need someone to play an insufferable know-it-all. That's kind of the vibe I got off of him. And as much as he was trying to be a Mr. Emotionless, I'm just here about the rules, he kind of just came off really snotty, and I didn't like it. So I was like, I would have much preferred somebody else who, well, got Vulcans, and maybe that was kind of the point, and maybe that's why he didn't have much to do in this episode,
Right.
because it would have been hard if he had done a very good job, because then you would have wanted to see more of him.
Right.
And so it's easier if they suck, because it wasn't supposed to be about him. It was about Una and Nira.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Again, interesting episode. Just to repeat what I said earlier, I feel like there were several things that had to happen in order for the plot to be dramatic in the courtroom scenes.
Hmm.
Whereas I think that meant characters acted in ways that didn't quite make as much logical. I guess I use that word intentionally. Sense. Um, yeah. Anyway, so yeah, but it's still a great episode. I liked it.
Yeah,
I was glad when last night you and I were talking and you were like, "Did you watch that episode?" I was like, "Oh crap, I totally forgot." And I was like, "Well, you think I should watch it?"
it
And
was like,
I saw your face, and you were like, and I was like, "Yeah, okay, let's pause. My bad. We'll record the next day. We'll record
yeah,
24 hours later." And as I was watching, I was like, "Yeah, I can see why you
yeah.
wanted to
And I
talk
mean,
about
it's a great episode, and it did tie into it, because again, so we first heard about the Illyrians in the 22nd century. We see this episode at Astra here in the 23rd century, and we hear of Starfleet is now going to look at um, augment cases on a case by case basis. To which we then jump forward now to the 24th century, the latter part of the 24th century, and we have Dr. Bashir, who also got off on a technicality.
right,
And what we have seen is it was kind of a reduction, because Bashir was going to be cashiered out of Starfleet, and his dad took a plea deal to get Julian to be able to stay in Starfleet. And even the plea deal that he took, he was going to serve in a penal colony for, like, what did they say, like 2 years, 3 years? It certainly wasn't 20 years. And if you know anything about Federation penal colonies, that's a walk in the park, man.
yeah,
2 years on a vacation. Like, if you watch Star Trek Voyager, as a matter of fact, when the season series starts, Janeway goes to the penal colony in Australia or New Zealand, wherever, to pick up Tom Paris, and it's an idyllic setting. She's walking through this lush greenery. It could be a park, but it's the penal colony, and he's outside doing some work on whatever the heck it is that he's working on. But it's nice. There's flowers. There's birds and stuff. Yeah, yeah.
You're
Prisons
not
get
allowed. You're not allowed to leave paradise in the future.
yeah,
That's
right,
how prison
right.
works.
Right. Their prisons are a night and day difference from what we think of as a contemporary prison. So it's like, yeah,
Gotcha.
okay, send me to that prison. I will definitely go there for 2 years and be
Yeah.
taken care of.
Might
So
be actually
yeah,
convinced to commit a crime or two.
right. Uh, yeah, it's like they've eliminated every reason for you to commit a crime. But if for some reason you do commit one, here's where you're going to stay, this luxury beach resort.
Yeah.
Have fun,
That's hilarious. The idea that the incentives for committing crimes go from the whatever benefit the crime gave you on a direct level to the consequence of the crime is actually better than whatever the crime itself somehow got for you.
Right.
Yeah, that's hilarious.
So yeah, so we see that with Bashir and what happens to his family, and now here we are with Jack, Lauren, Serena, and Patrick, and they too are under what appears to be again a case by case basis. They're not in prison. Their families, as far as we know, aren't suffering. They've
Right.
been institutionalized, but not because they're genetically modified, but because they have sufficient issues that don't seem to allow them to function on
They
their
fall
own.
more in a special needs category than
Yes,
yeah.
exactly. They're more yes. Serena doesn't talk. Patrick's functionally 8 years old. Lauren,
Only Jack and Lauren could be conceived as normal. Jack is just so hyper all the time.
yeah, and
Yeah.
his paranoia would probably preclude him from being able to exist in normal society.
Right, 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 100%.
Lauren would probably be the one that would be the most successful, but
Right.
her hypersexual nature would end up getting her into a lot of trouble. So, so yeah. Um,
Oh my gosh.
but again, we see that they are treated much differently than the severity that Una was facing when we see her in her trial some 100 years previously. So it seems like this episode does a great job of explaining um, how we can get to Bashir and the other augments. So I like that about this episode, that it takes something that is intrinsically Star Trek. They have been dealing with this issue for quite a while, and they don't do anything that messes up what has already come before, because that's always the problem with shows like Strange New Worlds, where you come
Uh-huh.
after another show but you're technically set before it. You've got to be very careful with what you say and what you do, because you could mess something up. But I don't think that they do. I think they do a great job of slipping this one in there and making it work.
Right.
So before we close everything out, I just got to ask, where do you fall on the idea of genetic modification, manipulation, augments, so forth and so on? Do you think that this is something that humans should continue to explore? Because as we've talked about in our show before, this is something that humanity is currently doing. We've talked about cloning. We've talked about all this stuff. We know that we're doing
Man,
it currently. Should we continue down that road with all these examples from Star
man,
Trek
you
to
asked me
your
this. It's
Foundation
we're
books?
we're almost an hour and a half into our
Yes.
episode here. Now you
Hey,
ask me the big questions. My
yes, I
God.
do. You're welcome.
Um, it is funny. We have talked about these things before, and gosh, it's one of those things where I'm curious to see what I said last time. Like if I were to go back and like just compare my answers, like have I changed my answer? I would say this that certainly figuring out how to stop negative things from happening 100% makes sense. Genetic disorders, how do we keep those from occurring? Because those are in the category of not trying to get someone superior to someone else, but just bring someone who has something like my family suffers from a thyroid disorder that so if my family's if our thyroids could all work properly, then great. um but yeah, the question of, I guess, really comes down to what are the modifications we're talking about and how serious are they, because in
Mhm.
science fiction we can really
Well,
we like you said, we can really go crazy with it.
so in science fiction, it's always been though. From what I can recall from all the science fiction I've ever consumed, it always follows the same path, which is we start doing genetic modifications to cure legit illnesses and maladies. We eliminate, thyroid conditions, cancer, diabetes. Well, all these things get cured, right? To the point where beyond, just old age, nothing kills us, right?
Right.
But then genetic modifications come in to be like, it's that next bit. We've perfected the human body. There's nothing else that can naturally take us out. So now we're looking to, do you want to be faster? Do you want to be stronger? Do you want to be smarter? Now we're getting into the realm of, these are not things that are necessary. It starts to get to that elective cosmetic level. Hey,
Yeah.
you need your eyes to see a broader spectrum, so we can genetically modify your eyes to take in more of the spectrum. Or you
Yeah.
need uh you want to be a Olympic uh hurdler or whatever, so we're going to genetically modify your legs so that you can clear the hurdles better and faster. And someone finds out about us, now they're going to have the same thing done to them, but at a different level, so that their muscles develop differently. And like, that's kind of the snowball effect. We go from
Yes.
curing the legitimate thing to, let's, pervert it and make it
Yeah.
cosmetic.
But as I think I remember, and I've said talked about it before, but the movie Gattaca really addresses this
Hmm.
as the that's the whole point. Is the main character Ethan Hawke? He was born naturally, but his parents decide that his younger brother will be genetically modified, and they can pick details about him. I think like eye colors or whatever. And um, I guess the real question is, if it's inevitable, what do we do about the inevitability of it? Not is it right or wrong. Maybe that's not a question. It's not a question of right or wrong. It's a question of like, how do we deal with it? How do we address it? Like every like we should focus on making sure everyone doesn't suffer from the negative stuff. And if you are positively enhanced, like in the Olympic sense, then there's a genetically enhanced category and there's a natural category.
Hmm.
Because like I don't mind the idea of like say baseball players, like if there's a steroid juiced category and there's a natural players category, that actually would be fine in my mind. Like let some guys go
So
get
so
roided
that
out.
that argument has been made too, that like steroids would probably be our closest analogy to the genetic modification, because steroids do pump you up and change your body, because of their chemical composition. So it's like, should you allow professional athletes to be, on whatever it is they take, to hit balls harder and farther and run faster and all that other kind of stuff? Should that be allowed? I've always said the kind of same as you, of, I don't care.
Right.
I care at the, like, high school and collegiate level, but when
Yeah.
you get into professionals and being paid and all that other kind of stuff, if the person wants to do that to their body, they're a full on, fully informed adult who's making a business decision. That is on them. That is
Right.
completely on them. If they, end up having a stroke and die, that is unfortunately, that's a consequence of the choice
Right.
they made.
Right.
So it shouldn't be made to seem like, um, you know, it's this kind of illicit thing when they actively chose to make that. Now, I do understand, but even saying that, I do understand the need to restrict those drugs, those steroids, something like that, because initially those steroids were for medicinal purposes. So we shouldn't still just be like, okay, well, we're going to say that, it's legal, that's fine, you can do it, because people will start buying all that stuff in bulk, and it will become abused, and then people who
Yeah.
shouldn't have it will get a hold of it, and they'll be
Yeah.
injecting it into kids and everything else. So it should still be
Eh,
something that is tightly controlled and regulated. But at
right.
the same time, if you are an otherwise legal adult who's making an informed decision, and that is your time and that is your money, you should have every right to do it. And if you accept, and you just have to accept the consequences that come with it. If you
Right.
do it right and you get all muscled out and whatever, and that's great, but it puts an undue strain on your heart, and you know die, that
Right.
was your choice. I still think that we should be, testing children, Of course, because it might not be their decision. There might be an adult somewhere that's pressuring them or injecting them without them knowing or telling them what's in it. Or they think that they're just getting vitamins and they're really getting, steroids or whatever. So yeah, those things need to be watched for and monitored, but
Right.
not the other one.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a fascinating question. And again, I just have to fall in the idea of maybe it's not a yes or like a right or wrong. It's a how do we
Yeah.
do it responsibly?
I think that's
Yeah.
true of a lot of things for us right now. How do you? Because it's easy to say it will put pressure on athletes to compete, and we don't want them to have that kind of pressure. But competition is pressure. That's the whole
Right.
point of competing. That's why you sign up to compete. You are playing the game. Can you achieve the goal under pressure, under
Right.
the rules and the code and the whatever else
Yes.
that you've
Yes.
agreed to play? That is
Yes.
100% a part of it. And I hate it when I hear people say, "Oh, well, we should take this pressure off." No, you should put the pressure on. That's the whole
Right.
point. You want people who can perform under pressure to play the game to achieve the sport. That's why they do it. If there was no pressure, everybody would play it. It would be boring.
Right.
So the pressure is what makes it fun, and to see
Right.
who not only can play the game under pressure but play it well, to still have finesse and skill and artistry in something that does have such pressure for them to do. And that's why it ultimately sucks sometimes when you find out, oh, well, the reason they perform so well is because they were blood doping the whole time, or they were, abusing steroids. So maybe
Right.
having a separate league for those individuals,
Yeah.
fine. But yeah, um um pressure doesn't build character, it reveals it. Yeah. Um, to use a Q quote, it's not so much the games you play, but how you play the
Right.
game. So yeah, um, I agree with that. Well, I think since we're not quite at 2 hours, is there anything else that you want to say? Because it's almost midnight though. So is there
Yeah.
anything else that you would like to say about this episode these episodes before we
Yeah. No, I
close
was
them
gonna
out?
say part of the reason this episode's so long is because we did 2 episodes in one. Yeah, it's I think I've already said it, but I'll just say it again. This episode, by talking both of them, by bringing up the problems of genetic modification, bring up a fantastic question that even you and I, are just now able to still have a full on conversation about without even referencing Star Trek for like 10, 15 minutes.
Oh yeah,
So
oh yeah.
if Star Trek can bring up these great questions, then episodes around those questions are almost inherently going to just have an advantage of being good episodes. The Deep Space Nine one, it's a Bashir episode. We didn't mention that it's cute to see that like O'Brien wanted to be with Bashir, and so he faked needing to
A
change
reason to come down to
everything.
the
But,
cargo bay.
it's so cute because he used to hate Bashir with a passion. And they were genetically modified such that they could tell that there was something wrong with the plasma converter. The flow was wrong, and
They could hear it.
yeah, I could hear it. It's a pitched whine. Um, I think that the Strange New World episode was better in the sense that it more directly it addressed this problem head on
Mhm.
in a courtroom drama, and courtroom dramas are just exciting in general. They're just, I mean, there's reasons that Law and Order is still on if after like 30 years. They've had like 15 different versions of Law and Order. Um, so yeah, and as you said, the Star Trek courtroom dramas are usually some of the best episodes they do. The actress who got to be the lawyer, I don't remember who she is at the moment, but let me
Nira
look her up.
Katul. You're talking about the
Uh,
actress who played
yes,
Nira, right?
yeah, uh huh, yeah. Is that
Um,
who?
I can't pronounce the actress's name. Badaki is her last name.
Okay,
But she's been in a lot of things before and since, and
right,
she always gives kind of that powerhouse performance. So
Right.
I would strongly suggest looking her up. There's multiple links for stuff for her on the StarTrek.com site. You can find it on Memory Alpha as well, which we will include the links for as well. Just check her out. She's a great actress.
Right.
So yeah, if you have any interest at all, we'll make sure that stuff is available. But yeah, she does a great job here.
It was funny because I was a little bit worried that jumping into that episode without having watched the show, I'd be lost. And it was funny because the episode does get going. Like it's not. It definitely feels more like a serialized show where like the plot moves forward. It's not episodic like Deep Space Nine because like it jumped right in. It didn't stop to like get me updated with the characters and who's what. Like when reading the plot synopsis, I just now realized that the the lawyer, the prosecution lawyer, she's apparently the girlfriend of Captain Pike. Like I didn't know that by watching the episode. It was only in reading
So
this.
the episode is a largely standalone episode, but in order to kind of understand why people have certain grudges or whatever, there were a couple of things here and there that it would have helped if you'd watched a couple of other episodes, but not really. Like, yeah, she's his girlfriend, but watching the episode where it tells us that she's his girlfriend, would it have done anything to change this? No, not really.
Right.
The There were a couple of episodes about Una being Illyrian where she kind of, like, there was one where the crew was infected by something and she got infected, but then it cured itself within her body. And that was
Ooh.
before we knew what was going on with her. So when you
Uh,
saw that, you were like, what the heck was that? And they didn't really explain it until much, much later. So, but did not seeing that scene take away from this episode? Not at all. They told you right away she was on trial for being Illyrian. The only thing that you also would have missed would have been when she was arrested for being Illyrian. They had come back from a mission, they had solved whatever, and just as she was, they were celebrating, the chick arrived to arrest her, and you see her being escorted out, and you're like, what's up? And then they did the whole previously on Strange New Worlds, and you saw that scene, you would have been like,
okay.
what's going on? Why? So say to watch that. Now, it looks like we're beginning to have technical difficulties. I guess we've talked a bit too long here, so I'm not surprised at all that we're suddenly having these difficulties because this system is just always.
Hey, I'm
I'm not
back.
surprised at all. Yeah, not. I'm just saying. I'm not surprised we're all starting to have difficulties. This is the longest that we've run in a bit. So,
Yeah.
but we'll get that figured out. We're almost here towards the end, anyhow.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Um, well, I think that will kind of sum things up for us anyway. Um, just a little side to the conversation we were having. I don't think that Jordy would count as augmented. He would be listed as disabled because of the fact that he was one born blind. The visor, while it does give him the ability to see things others cannot, it does not actually enhance his vision because he cannot see normal things that the rest of us can. An enhancement would be something that takes that to the next level, not
Right.
gives him an entirely different type of vision, which is what the visor does, and it causes him pain as well, as we find out
And
later
it's
on.
removable, and if he loses it, then he is back to being disabled again. So,
Yes, he's back to
as
being
we've seen,
100% blind.
yeah,
Yes, yes. So
at
all those
least,
are good points.
yeah,
So
it's a tool.
yes. So to that end, we're going to go ahead and wrap this up. Thank you all for sticking with us, of course. And you can watch this episode on YouTube when we're done if you want to, of course. And you can find us and follow us anywhere you happen to do your social medias. And you can listen to us anywhere you listen to podcasts. Again, as I said earlier, I do that on Spotify. So until next week, guys, take care of yourselves.
Thanks, guys.